The winter wind cut through the New Mexico territory like a dull knife through frozen meat. Snow fell in thick curtains across the Chusca Mountains, turning the world into a whitewashed blur where earth met sky without distinction. It was the kind of cold that made men question their choices, the kind that turned decisions into life or death. In the valley below, between two ancient cottonwood trees that had witnessed 100 winters before this one, a woman hung suspended above the frozen ground. Her name was Ayasha, 28 years old, Apache, widow of a federal lawyer, and at this particular moment, 6 inches from salvation she could not reach, she had stopped screaming approximately 3 hours ago. Not because the pain had lessened. The ropes still bit into her wrists like iron teeth, cutting through skin and muscle with methodical cruelty. And at the center of it all, checking his pocket watch with the casual indifference of a man waiting for a train, stood Colonel Harlow Crane, 52 years old, decorated cavalry officer, hero of the Indian Wars, or so the newspapers back east like to call him. His uniform was pristine despite the weather, buttons polished to a mere shine, boots without a speck of mud. Everything about him spoke of control, of order, of a man who had never questioned whether the world bent to his will because it always had. The pocket watch clicked shut with a sound that carried in the still air. 3 hours and 47 minutes, Crane said to no one in particular. His voice was cultured, educated, the kind of accent that came from good schools back east and careful cultivation. I must say, Mrs. Whitepath, your resilience is admirable. Most would have succumbed by now. Ayasha's head lifted slowly. The movement cost her everything she had left, every ounce of strength pooled in muscles that had been screaming for hours. Her face was pale beneath the brown skin, lips cracked and bleeding, but her eye burned with something that cold and pain had not managed to extinguish. "My husband," she said, each word scraped from a throat raw from screaming. Thought that words on paper could change the world. Crane stepped closer, boots crunching on frozen ground. And look where that got, dead in a ditch with his neck broken, officially drunk and fallen from his horse. He smiled, and it was the smile of a snake that had already swallowed its prey. Though we both know the truth, don't we? Elias never drank. The words came out stronger than they should have, fueled by rage that transcended physical agony. We are Apache. Alcohol is forbidden. Ah yes, the noble savage and his moral code. Crane's smile widened. Tell me, does that code say anything about stealing federal documents? About fleeing lawful custody? About spreading lies that could damage the reputation of good men doing difficult work? Ayasha's laugh was bitter as the wind. Good men, is that what you call yourselves? The men who murder families in their sleep and call it progress? Who burn homes and call it a civilization? Who take everything and leave nothing but graves? The colonel's expression hardened. He stepped even closer, near enough that she could smell the pomade in his hair, the tobacco on his breath, the faint scent of expensive whiskey that he had probably consumed with breakfast. Your husband spent 12 years gathering his precious evidence, Crane said quietly, pitched for her ears alone. 12 years thinking he could use our own laws against us. And where did it get him? In the ground. Where it will get you. And where it will get that half-breed son of yours if you don't tell me where you hid his ledger. For the first time since they had strung her up, real fear flickered across Ayasha's face. My son has nothing to do with this. Naichi, 14 years old, currently residing at Fort Sumner, or so my sources tell me. Crane's voice was casual, conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than the life of a child. Protective custody, we call it, though I imagine the boy sees it somewhat differently. If you touch him, you'll what, Mrs. Whitepath? You're hardly in a position to make threats. Crane pulled his pocket watch out again, made a show of checking the time. Where is the ledger? Burn in hell. The colonel sighed, snapped the watch shut, and walked to the rope pulley mechanism that controlled the tension on her bindings. I was hoping you'd be reasonable. Your husband wasn't, and well, we saw how that ended. His hand closed around the rope. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he pulled. Ayasha's scream echoed across the valley, raw and primal and full of an agony that made even the hardened soldiers look away. Her shoulders wrenched backward. joints popping with sounds like dry wood breaking. Her body convulsed, back arching into a bow that no spine should be forced to make. Crane held the rope taut for 5 seconds that stretched into eternity. Then he released it, letting her sag back to her previous position, gasping and shuddering. "The ledger, Mrs. Whitepath." "Go to hell." "Anyone else?" Crane turned to address the crowd, voice carrying with the practiced projection of a man used to command. "Anyone else want to question the law? Anyone else believe that a woman with stolen documents and wild accusations deserves sympathy rather than justice?" Silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words, heavy with things unsaid and eyes carefully averted. Whatever sympathy might have existed in that crowd and had been beaten out by cold and fear and the simple human need to be somewhere warmer, somewhere this wasn't happening, somewhere they could pretend they hadn't watched a woman die. Crane nodded, satisfied. "I thought not." His hand went back to the rope. "Last chance, Mrs. Whitepath." The shot came from the east. The sound cracked across the valley like a whip, sharp and clear despite the muffling snow. The rope holding Ayesha's right arm, the one Crane had been about to pull, suddenly went slack. Not frayed, not torn, cut clean through by a bullet that had passed within inches of the colonel's head. Every head turned, every hand went to weapons. And through the swirling white curtain of falling snow, a figure emerged on horseback. The horse was a gray Appaloosa, its coat marked with darker spots that seemed to shift and blur in the snowfall. It moved with the steady confidence of an animal that knew mountain trails, that had carried its rider through worse storms than this and expected to do so again. The rider sat tall in the saddle, a man in his mid-40s who moved with the confidence of hard-earned experience. He wore a duster coat the color of old leather, patched in a dozen places but clean and well-maintained. A wide-brimmed hat, pulled low, hid most of his face. What showed was weathered skin, deep-set eyes the color of winter sky, and a beard so thick and full it looked like red-brown moss had taken root on his jaw. In his hands, held with the casual ease of long familiarity, rested a Sharp's rifle. Thin smoke still curled from the barrel. The man rode forward slowly, each step measured and deliberate. He stopped 20 feet from the nearest soldier, 30 feet from Colonel Crane, close enough to talk, far enough that rushing him would be suicide. When he spoke, his voice carried a faint Irish lilt, softened by decades in America, but never quite erased. "So this is what passes for justice in the territories now, is it? Stringing up women without trial?" Crane's hand had gone to the pistol at his hip, but he hadn't drawn it. Not yet. "This is none of your concern, stranger. I see a woman being tortured in the open. I'm making it my concern." The rifle shifted slightly in the man's hands, not quite aiming at anyone, but not quite aimed away either. "She have a trial? Judge? Jury?" "She's a federal fugitive. Stole classified Army documents. Fled lawful custody. Then she belongs in front of a judge, not hanging in a field like a deer carcass." A soldier to Crane's left started to bring his rifle up. The mountain man's eyes flicked to him, and something in that gaze made the soldier freeze. "I wouldn't," the mountain man said softly. "I was a scout for General Crook during the Sioux campaigns, fought at the Rosebud, killed 31 men over the course of 3 months, and every single one of them was armed and trying to kill me." A pause. "You feeling lucky today, Colonel?" Crane's eyes narrowed. "You know who I am." Everyone in the territory knows Harlow Crane, hero of the Indian Wars, decorated officer, friend to progress and civilization. The man's tone made it clear what he thought of those descriptions. "Though I hear some other names too. Butcher of Turkey Creek, the railroad's dog, Colonel 30 pieces of silver." "Careful, old man. I'm just repeating what I hear." The mountain man's hands adjusted on the rifle, and several soldiers took involuntary steps backward. "Now here's what's going to happen. I'm going to cut that woman down. You're going to let me, and we're going to ride away. Simple as that." Crane laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "And if I refuse? If I order my men to shoot you where you sit? Then I die. But not before I put this bullet through your skull. At this range with this rifle, I couldn't miss if I tried." The mountain man's voice was calm, stating facts rather than making threats. So you have to ask yourself, Colonel, is stopping one old man worth your life? The standoff held. Snow continued to fall. The wind continued to howl. And in the silence between them, everyone present made their own calculations about how this would end. Crane's hand tightened on his pistol grip. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Maybe not, but I know what I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing is wrong. Wrong. Crane's laugh was bitter now. Let me tell you about wrong, old man. Wrong as Apache raiders burning ranches. Wrong as settlers murdered in their beds. Wrong as this savage, he gestured at Ayasha without looking at her, and her husband trying to undermine everything we've built here, everything we've sacrificed for. Sacrificed. The mountain man's voice went quiet and cold in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. Tell me about sacrifice, Colonel. Tell me about the Martinez family. March of '76, father, mother, 2 sons, all dead in a house fire while your soldiers stood guard outside. Crane went very still. Or how about Medicine Man Mangus, June of '76, found hanging from a tree 3 days after he protested the railroad blasting through sacred burial grounds. Ruled a suicide even though everyone knows Apache don't kill themselves. The mountain man's eyes never left Crane's face. Want me to keep going? Because I can. I've got a whole list. Where did you hear those names? I hear things, I see things, I remember things. The rifle came up now, no longer casual, aimed directly at Crane's chest. And I'm done watching good people die while men like you call it progress. Crane's hand moved for his pistol. The mountain man was faster. The shot echoed like thunder in the confined valley. Crane's scream followed a heartbeat later, high and shocked and full of pain he had never expected to feel. His right hand, the one reaching for his gun, suddenly fountained blood. The pistol fell to the snow, useless. 2 fingers were completely gone. The rest were mangled beyond use. The colonel dropped to his knees, cradling his ruined hand against his chest. Soldiers raised rifles, but the mountain man already had another round chambered, the lever action smooth and practiced. Next man who moves gets one through the heart, he said calmly. I may be old, but I've still got 20 rounds in this rifle and another 6 in my Colt. How many of you want to die for a man who just tried to draw on an armed opponent? No one moved. The mountain man dismounted in one smooth motion, landing light despite his age. He walked toward Ayasha, pulling a Bowie knife from his belt as he went. The blade was a foot long, worn but razor sharp, the kind of knife that had seen hard use and regular maintenance. Can you ride? He asked in Apache, his accent rough but understandable. Ayasha blinked at him, struggling to focus through pain and exhaustion. Who are you? Someone who's tired of watching people die. He cut the first rope. Her right arm fell, and she cried out as blood rushed back into oxygen-starved tissues. Easy now, I've got you. The second rope parted. Ayasha collapsed forward, and he caught her before she hit the ground. Despite his age, his arms were strong, weathered by decades of mountain living into something more like seasoned wood than human muscle. Stay with me, he murmured, supporting her weight. Just a few more steps. Behind them, Crane had found his voice again. You're a dead man, Brennan. The mountain man paused, turned his head slowly to look at the bleeding colonel. You know my name. Jacob Brennan. They called you Mountain Jake during the Sioux Wars, age 45. No living family, no property, no ties. Crane's smile was vicious despite his pain. Did you think I didn't research the territory's troublemakers? Did you think I didn't know about every man who might cause problems? Then you know I don't bluff. And you should know that I don't forgive. Crane struggled to his feet, swaying, his left hand pressed against his bleeding right. You just made an enemy of more than me, old man. The railroad, the army, every man of wealth and power in this territory. Jacob had reached his horse. He lifted Ayasha with surprising gentleness, settling her across the saddle before mounting behind her. His arm wrapped around her waist, keeping her steady. I've made enemies before, Jacob said. Most of them are dead now. He started to turn the horse. Wait, Crane's voice cracked with something beyond pain. Before you ride off feeling heroic, let me tell you a story about a woman, young thing, maybe 22, 23, red hair like yours, hanged in Tucson, Arizona territory, 15 years ago. Jacob went rigid. The horse, sensing its rider's tension, danced nervously beneath him. Her name was Sarah, Sarah Brennan. Crane's smile was terrible to behold. Your sister, I believe, accused of horse theft. The evidence was questionable, but the rancher who made the accusation was wealthy. And well, justice has always been a flexible concept. You were there. Jacob's voice came out strangled. I signed the execution order. I was a captain then, stationed at Fort Lowell. The rancher was connected to the railroad even back then, and they wanted an example made, something to discourage other settlers from thinking they could challenge the established order. Crane swayed, his face going pale from blood loss, but his voice remained strong. She screamed for you, you know, at the end, called out for her big brother to save her. But you were scouting up in Colorado, weren't you? Didn't even know she'd been arrested until a week after they'd buried her. The rifle came up. Jacob's hands were shaking now, the iron control slipping. Do it, Crane invited. Shoot me. It won't bring her back. It won't undo any of it. And it will make you the same as me back. The moment stretched. Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger. One pull, that's all it would take. One bullet to end the man who had killed Sarah, who had tortured Ayasha, who had destroyed so many lives in the name of progress and profit. Ayasha's hand, weak and trembling, closed over his. Don't, she whispered. He wants you to. It gives him control. Jacob's breath came harsh and ragged, the rifle lowered slowly, reluctantly. If you touch her son, he said, voice low and deadly, if you so much as breathe in his direction, I will come back, and I won't be aiming for your hand next time. Crane laughed, a bubbling sound full of blood and malice. Fort Sumner, that's where the boy is. Naichi, age 14, half Apache, half white, all alone in a garrison full of soldiers who hate his kind. You think you can protect him? You think saving this woman changes anything? Jacob spurred his horse. The Appaloosa leaped forward, powerful legs driving through the snow, and within seconds they were lost in the white curtain of falling flakes. Behind them, Crane's voice echoed one last time. You're both dead, you hear me? The railroad owns this territory, owns the judges, owns the law, owns everything. There's nowhere you can hide. The words faded into the wind. The crowd began to disperse, people eager to be away from this scene, to pretend they hadn't witnessed what they'd witnessed, to go back to their warm homes and convince themselves that sometimes justice required difficult choices. Crane stood alone in the snow, cradling his ruined hand, and smiled despite the pain, because he had just done something very useful. He had made Jacob Brennan angry, and angry men made mistakes. The ride through the mountains was a blur of white and cold, and Ayasha's labored breathing against Jacob's chest. He pushed the horse hard, harder than he should have in these conditions, but Crane would have men after them within the hour, and he needed distance more than he needed caution. Ayasha drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she spoke, rambling words in Apache that Jacob's limited knowledge couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes she called for her son, and sometimes, to his surprise, she called for her husband. Elias, she murmured against his shoulder. I found it. I found where you hid it. Easy now, Jacob said, though she couldn't hear him over the wind. Save your strength. The ledger, in the desk, the false bottom, just like you said. Her voice faded. I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm sorry I didn't believe. Jacob guided the horse up a narrow defile between rock walls, following a trail only he and a handful of old trappers knew existed. The snow was deeper here, the going slower, but it would hide their tracks, and that was worth the lost time. As they climbed, his mind kept returning to Crane's words. Sarah, God, he hadn't let himself think about Sarah in years, had buried the memory so deep he had almost convinced himself that it hadn't happened. Almost. The cabin appeared like a mirage through the snow, tucked against the mountainside, half buried in the earth in the old Ute style, its sod roof white with accumulated snowfall. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, a thin gray line against the white sky. Someone was already there. Jacob's hand went to his Colt, but before he could draw, the door opened and a familiar figure emerged. Magnus was old, older than Jacob, older than mountains, or so it sometimes seemed. 67 years with a face like weathered granite and a beard white as the snow around them. Norwegian by birth, American by choice, and mountain man by necessity after his farm had been seized by railroad-backed speculators 20 years back. Fader I Himmel, Magnus breathed, seeing the woman draped across Jacob's saddle. What have you done, Jake? Something stupid. Help me get her inside. Together they carried Ayasha into the cabin's warmth. The interior was spare but functional. A single large room with a stone fireplace at one end, a rope bed at the other, shelves of supplies, and weapons hung on every available wall surface. Books were stacked in corners, their spines worn. Shakespeare sat next to frontier survival guides. The Bible leaned against Apache medicine text. They laid Ayasha on the bed. Magnus brought water, bandages, while Jacob stoked the fire higher. Her wrists, Magnus said, examining the rope burns. Dislocated shoulders, probably broken ribs. She needs a doctor. Closest doctor is in Fort Defiance, where Crane controls everything. Jacob started cutting away Ayasha's frozen clothing, trying to maintain what modesty he could while exposing the injuries. We'll have to do it ourselves. You know medicine? I know enough. Learned some from the Sioux during the war. More from the Ute after. Jacob's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for internal bleeding, feeling for broken bones. She'll live if we keep her warm, if infection doesn't set in, if Crane's men don't find us. That's a lot of ifs. It usually is. They worked in silence for a time. Magnus had brought supplies, as Jacob had known he would. The old Norwegian had a sixth sense for trouble and an unfortunate habit of showing up right when Jacob needed him most. Whether that was good luck or bad had yet to be determined. Ayasha's clothing was ruined, soaked, and frozen. Jacob wrapped her in wool blankets, layering them thick. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The color was slowly returning to her face, though it would be hours before they knew if there was permanent damage. Magnus pulled a chair close to the fire and sat with a heavy sigh. So, you going to tell me why you decided to shoot Colonel Harlow Crane in front of half his garrison? Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Jake. She was being tortured, Magnus. Strung up like an animal. No trial, no judge, just Crane and his rope and 30 people too scared to speak up. Jacob stood at the window, looking out at the falling snow. I couldn't watch it happen. Not again. Again, Magnus's voice went soft. You're thinking about Sarah. Crane was there. Did you know that? He signed her execution order. He admitted it. Threw it in my face like it was something to be proud of. Jake. 15 years, Magnus. 15 years I've been living up here, trying to forget. Trying to pretend the world isn't exactly what I know it to be. And today I saw it all happen again and His fist hit the window frame, making the glass rattle. I couldn't let it happen again. Magnus let the silence stretch. Then quietly, what's her name? Ayasha, widow of a federal lawyer named Elias Whitepath. First Apache to ever pass the bar, from what I understand. I know that name. Magnus sat forward. Whitepath. He defended me 2 years back when they tried to claim my trapping rights were fraudulent. Good man, honest. Rare thing in a lawyer. Dead now, Crane's doing, if I had to guess. And the woman? Has something Crane wants. Badly enough to torture her for it. Badly enough to threaten her son. Jacob turned from the window. There's more to this than one woman and one hanging. Magnus. There's something bigger. As if in response, Ayasha stirred. Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as she registered her surroundings. She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, fell back. Easy, Jacob said, moving to her side. You've been hurt. Need to rest. My son. The words came out cracked and desperate. Nietzsche, they have him at Fort Sumner. I know, Crane told me. You have to get him. Please, he's only 14. He's done nothing. They'll kill him to get to me. We'll get him. Jacob pulled the chair close, sat so he was eye level with her. But first you need to tell me what's going on. What does Crane want from you? Ayasha's hand moved to her side, searching for something that wasn't there. Panic crossed her face. The ledger. Where is it? Did they take it? I don't know what ledger you're talking about. My satchel, leather, worn. There was a book inside, black cover. If they have it, she tried to rise again, fighting against pain and weakness. Everything Elias died for. Magnus stood and retrieved the satchel from where Jacob had dropped it near the door. He brought it to the bed, handed it to Ayasha with unexpected gentleness. Her hands shook as she opened it, pulled out the ledger, held it against her chest like a sacred object. It's here. Thank God. It's here. What is it? Jacob asked. Ayasha looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, taking in the red beard, the weathered face, the eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. Who are you? Jacob Brennan. They called me Mountain Jake during the Sioux campaigns. This is Magnus Olafson, and we're both men who have reasons to hate Colonel Crane. Then you'll help me? Depends on what you need help with. Ayasha opened the ledger. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, dates and names and numbers in columns. She turned it so Jacob and Magnus could see. My husband was a federal prosecutor, she said. For 14 years, he investigated crimes against Native peoples. Land theft, murder, corruption. This ledger contains everything he discovered. Jacob leaned closer, reading. His expression changed with each entry he absorbed. March 1876, Martinez family. Refused to sell land rights to Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. House fire. 4 dead. Official report, Apache raid. Actual, Colonel Crane paid $1,800 to arrange accident and file false report. June 1876, Medicine Man Mongus. Protested railroad blasting near sacred burial grounds. Found hanged 3 days later. Official ruling, suicide. Actual, Colonel Crane paid $1,200 to silence opposition. September 1876, Navajo family at Canyon de Chelly. Refused relocation. Entire family disappeared. No bodies found. Official report, fled to Mexico. Actual, Colonel Crane paid $900, on and on, page after page, 68 entries total, 68 deaths documented before Elias himself became the 69th, each one with Crane's name attached, each one with a dollar amount beside it. Jacob's hands were shaking when he looked up. Martinez Ranch. March of 76, I was there. Ayasha went very still. What? I was scouting for the army. Crane ordered a night march, said we were tracking Geronimo's band, said they were hiding at the Martinez place. Jacob's voice had gone flat and distant. When we got there were no Apache, just a family, sleeping. Magnus put a hand on his friend's shoulder. Crane ordered the house burned. I refused, put my rifle down and walked away, resigned my commission the next morning. Jacob looked at Ayasha, and she saw something terrible in his eyes. Guilt that no amount of time could wash clean. 4 people died because I didn't stop it. A father, a mother, 2 sons. The youngest was 6 years old. Martinez was my cousin, Ayasha said quietly. The words hung between them like a physical weight. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. No, it doesn't. Jacob stood, walked to the fireplace, stared into the flames. But maybe this does. Maybe stopping Crane, exposing what he's done, maybe that counts for something. It counts for everything. Ayasha struggled to sit up despite the pain. Elias spent 14 years gathering this evidence. He was going to take it to Santa Fe, to a newspaper editor he trusted, a man named Walter Nash, the only journalist he believed couldn't be bought. Crane found out. Elias died on the road to Santa Fe, his horse standing over him, broken neck. They ruled it an accident, too much whiskey. Her laugh was bitter. My husband never drank, not once in all the years I knew him. So Crane killed him, and then spent the last 9 months trying to find this ledger. He knew Elias kept records. He just didn't know where they were hidden. Ayasha's fingers traced the leather cover. Elias showed me once, the false bottom in his desk, said if anything ever happened to him, I should take the ledger and run. I didn't believe him, thought he was being paranoid. Magnus had been quiet through all of this, but now he spoke. If Crane wants this ledger badly enough to torture you, he'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. I know, and if he has your son, he has leverage. He can make you do anything. I know that too. Ayasha looked between the 2 men. That's why I need your help. I can't fight an army alone. I can't rescue Naichi and get this ledger to Santa Fe and survive long enough to testify. But maybe together. You're asking two old men to go to war with the entire territorial government, Jacob said. I'm asking two good men to help me finish what my husband started. Jacob looked at Magnus. The Norwegian shrugged. You already shot him. Might as well finish the job. Despite everything, Jacob almost smiled. He turned back to Ayasha. First things first, we get your son. Then we figure out how to bring Crane's whole empire crashing down. Fort Sumner usually has 20 to 30 soldiers, but they rotate detachments. Could be less. I've raided places with worse odds. Jacob began checking his weapons, the familiar ritual of preparation. We go in quiet, get Naichi, get out. Crane will never know what hit him. And if something goes wrong, then we improvise. Magnus stood and began gathering his own equipment. When do we leave? Soon as the storm breaks. 2, maybe 3 days. Jacob loaded his rifle, checked his Colt, sharpened his Bowie knife. Rest while you can, Mrs. Whitepath. Once we start this, there's no going back. Ayasha lay back against the pillows, exhausted but alert. One more thing. What? You're doing this because of your sister, because Crane killed her and you want revenge. Does it matter why? Yes, Ayasha's eyes were fierce despite her weakness, because revenge burns hot and dies quick. But justice, true justice, that lasts. If we're going to do this, if we're going to risk everything, it can't be just about revenge. It has to be about stopping this from happening again. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're right. Sarah would have wanted justice, not revenge. And she wouldn't have wanted her death to be meaningless. Neither would Elias. Then we do it right. We expose everything. Make sure everyone knows what Crane's done. Make sure it can never happen again. You understand what that means? Crane has the railroad behind him. Judges, politicians, wealthy men who benefit from his work. We're not just fighting one man. We're fighting an entire system. Systems can fall. I've seen it happen. Jacob checked his rifle one more time, then set it aside. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning. In 3 days we get your son. And then we make Colonel Crane wish he'd never heard the name Brennan or Whitepath. Ayasha closed her eyes. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, and she slept. The ledger still clutched against her chest like a talisman against the darkness. Jacob and Magnus sat by the fire, not speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the storm continued to howl, burying the valley in white, erasing tracks and hiding secrets. And somewhere in the gathering dark, Colonel Harlow Crane wrapped his ruined hand and planned his revenge against the mountain man who had dared to challenge the order of things, the man who had chosen the wrong side of history. But in this, as in so many things, the colonel would discover he had miscalculated. Because Jacob Brennan had not chosen a side. He had simply decided that some things were worth dying for, and the truth was one of them. The old man's voice filled the ranch house, crackling like the fire that warmed the winter night. Samuel sat transfixed, his 10-year-old eyes whistled as his grandfather continued the tale. Samuel leaned forward, unable to contain himself. So you saved grandmother Ayasha from the hanging. You shot the colonel's hand, but Grandpa, what about Naichi? Did you get him out? Jacob's weathered face creased into something between a smile and a grimace. We did, boy, but that rescue cost us more than any of us expected. Let me tell you about the night we raided Fort Sumner. We did, but nothing worth doing comes without cost, boy. Remember that? The old man's gaze turned distant, looking past the walls of the ranch house to a time 50 years gone. And the price we paid started the very next morning. The storm had broken during the night, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white silence. Jacob woke at first light, a habit from his army days that age had not diminished. Magnus was already up, heating coffee over the fire with the economy of movement that spoke of decades spent in similar cabins. Ayasha still slept, her breathing easier now, but her face drawn with pain even in rest. The rope burns on her wrists had been cleaned and bandaged, but healing would take weeks. If they had weeks, if Crane gave them that long. She needs more time, Magnus said quietly in Norwegian, a language he fell back into when discussing difficult things. Another day at least. We don't have another day. Jacob poured coffee into a tin cup, the liquid black and bitter as regret. Every hour we wait is another hour Crane has to reinforce Fort Sumner, to set traps, to hurt that boy. So we go today? We go today. Ayasha's eyes opened. She had been awake longer than either man realized, listening. I'm coming with you. You can barely stand. He's my son. She pushed herself upright, biting back a cry as her shoulders protested. I've ridden with worse injuries. This isn't a debate, Mrs. Whitepath. You're right, it isn't. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, planted her feet on the floor and stood. For a moment she swayed, pale as milk, but she stayed upright through sheer force of will. I'm coming. You can tie me to the horse if you must, but I will be there when you bring my son out. Jacob and Magnus exchanged a look. The old Norwegian shrugged. She's got steel in her spine. Reminds me of my Ingrid, God rest her. Fine. Jacob set his cup down harder than necessary. But you follow orders, both of you. I've done this kind of work before, you haven't. They spent the morning preparing. Magnus checked weapons while Jacob studied the crude map he had drawn of Fort Sumner from memory. Ayasha copied pages from the ledger onto separate sheets of paper, creating backups that she hid in different locations around the cabin. Insurance, she explained when Jacob questioned it. If something happens to the ledger, if Crane's men find and destroy it, at least some evidence survives. You think like a lawyer's wife. I think like someone who has already lost everything once. I won't let it happen again. By noon, they were mounted and moving. Jacob led on his gray Appaloosa. Magnus followed on a sturdy bay gelding that had seen better years but still had heart. Ayasha rode a smaller paint mare, sitting the saddle with gritted teeth and refusing to show how much it hurt. The journey to Fort Sumner would take 4 hours in good conditions. In snow this deep, with one of them injured, it would take 6. They would arrive after dark. Good for stealth. Bad if things went wrong and they needed to see clearly. Tell me about the fort, Ayasha said as they rode. Talking helped distract from the pain. The layout? Built around 1862, originally as a reservation for the Navajo, Jacob's voice fell into the cadence of a military briefing. Square compound, adobe walls 12 feet high, 4 guard towers, 1 at each corner. Main gate faces east. Barracks on the north side, officers' quarters south, supply buildings west. Parade ground in the center. Where would they keep a prisoner? Not in the guardhouse. That's for soldiers who break discipline. A civilian, especially one they're holding as leverage, they'd keep somewhere more secure. Jacob thought for a moment. Probably the old supply building on the south end. It's got a cellar with stone walls, no windows, only one entrance. You seem very familiar with the place. I was stationed there for 3 months in '74, before I resigned my commission. Jacob's jaw tightened. Before I decided the Army and I had different ideas about what honor meant. They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the crunch of snow under hooves and the labored breathing of horses working hard through deep drifts. The sun arced across the sky, pale and cold, offering light but no warmth. It was Magnus who first spotted the tracks. Jake, the Norwegian reined in, pointing. Fresh, maybe 2 hours old. Jacob dismounted, studied the prints in the snow. 5 horses, riding hard, heading east, toward Fort Sumner. Crane's men, he said. How can you tell? Cavalry horses, shod military issue. See the spacing? That's formation riding. These aren't trappers or traders. These are soldiers. Ayasha's face had gone tight. They're going to the fort. Maybe, or maybe they're just on patrol. You don't believe that? No, ma'am, I don't. Jacob remounted. We keep moving. But careful now, eyes open. The sun was setting when they caught sight of Fort Sumner in the distance. Adobe walls glowed orange in the dying light. Guard towers stood dark against the sky. Smoke rose from chimneys, speaking of warmth and food, and men gathered around fires, confident in their safety. They stopped on a ridge overlooking the fort, using the last light to study their target. 2 guards at the main gate, Magnus observed. Can't see the towers from this angle, but assume at least 1 man in each. 6 guards minimum then, plus however many are inside. Jacob pulled out a small brass telescope, scanned the compound. I count 8 horses in the corral. So 8 men, maybe 10, against 3 of us, and one barely able to ride. Magnus said it without judgment, just stating facts. What's the plan? Jacob collapsed the telescope. We wait for full dark. Then Magnus and I go in over the south wall. Ayasha stays here with the horses. I already told you, Amayo, and I'm telling you that if you come, you'll get us all killed. Jacob's voice was firm, but not unkind. You can barely lift your arms. How are you going to climb a 12-foot wall? How are you going to fight if it comes to that? Ayasha opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She knew he was right. Hating it didn't change facts. Stay here, Jacob continued. Keep the horses ready. If you hear shooting, if things go wrong, you ride. Don't wait for us. Get to Santa Fe with that ledger. Finish what your husband started. I won't leave my son. Then pray we don't fail. Full darkness fell like a curtain. The moon was a thin crescent, offering almost no light. Good for stealth, bad for seeing where you were going. Jacob and Magnus left their horses with Ayasha and approached the fort on foot. They moved slowly, carefully, testing each step before committing weight. The snow muffled their footfalls but also made balance treacherous. The south wall loomed before them, adobe bricks pale against the night. 12 feet high, smooth, no handholds. Rope? Magnus whispered. Too much noise. Jacob pulled off his gloves, flexed his fingers. Give me a boost. The Norwegian made a stirrup with his hands. Jacob stepped into it, reached up, found the top of the wall with his fingertips. Magnus lifted and Jacob pulled, his arms screaming protest, age making everything harder than it used to be. For a moment he hung there half on, half off, wondering if this was where it ended. If 45 years of living was about to become 45 years of dying because his arms weren't strong enough anymore. Then he found purchase with his knee, levered himself up, rolled over the top, and landed inside the compound with a thump that sounded far too loud in the quiet night. He froze, listening. Voices from the barracks muffled. Laughter. Someone singing badly. Normal sounds. No alarm. Jacob found a rope in the supply shed, lowered it over the wall. Magnus climbed up with the ease of a man who had spent his life in mountains, age be damned. South End, Jacob whispered. The supply building. They moved through shadows, 2 old men playing at being young scouts again, their bodies remembering skills their minds thought forgotten. Past the barracks, around the officers' quarters. The supply building stood apart from the others, squat and dark. The door was locked. Magnus produced a set of picks from somewhere, worked the mechanism with steady hands. The lock clicked open. Inside, the building smelled of dust and old grain and something else. Fear. The scent of someone who had been afraid for a long time. Basement, Jacob said, finding the trapdoor. They descended into darkness. Jacob risked a match. The flare of light revealed a small cellar, stone walls weeping moisture, and in the corner a figure. Nietzsche. He was 14 but looked younger in the matchlight, thin and drawn. His hands were bound behind him. His face bore bruises. But his eyes, when they met Jacob's, were not afraid. They were angry. Who are you, the boy asked in Apache. Your mother sent me. My mother is dead. They told me Crane killed her. They lied. Jacob cut the ropes binding Nietzsche's wrists. She's alive, waiting outside the fort. But we need to move. Now. Why should I trust you? Because if I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. Jacob helped the boy to his feet. And because your mother is waiting, and if we don't get out of here in the next 5 minutes, we're all going to die together. That logic seemed to satisfy Nietzsche. He followed Jacob and Magnus up the ladder, through the building, out into the night. They had crossed half the compound when the alarm bell rang. The sound shattered the quiet like breaking glass. Suddenly, the night exploded with noise. Men shouting, boots running, the barracks doors flying open and soldiers pouring out. Run! Jacob grabbed Nietzsche's arm, hauling him toward the south wall. A rifle cracked. The bullet took Magnus in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled but didn't fall, kept moving through sheer stubbornness. More shots. The parade ground became a killing field. Bullets whipping past like angry hornets. Jacob returned fire, the Colt bucking in his hand. A soldier fell. Another. They reached the wall. The rope still hung there. Climb! Jacob shoved Naichi toward it. Boom! The boy climbed like his life depended on it, which it did. Magnus followed, slower, his left arm useless and bleeding. Jacob provided covering fire, backing toward the rope. His Colt ran dry. He dropped it, pulled his Bowie knife. A soldier charged. Jacob sidestepped, the blade flashing, and the soldier went down with a cry. Then he was climbing, hands burning on the rope, legs pumping. He reached the top as more shots rang out, threw himself over, landed hard on the other side, the impact driving air from lungs that were too old for this kind of treatment. Move! Magnus was on his feet, running despite his wound. Naichi ran beside him. They sprinted for the ridge where they had left Ayasha. Behind them, the fort gates were opening. Mounted soldiers would be coming. Ayasha saw them first, had the horses ready. Jacob mounted without breaking stride, pulled Naichi up behind him. Magnus barely made it into his saddle, his face gray with blood loss. Ride! Jacob spurred his Appaloosa. They thundered into the night, snow flying from under hooves, the sounds of pursuit close behind. 10 cavalry soldiers, maybe more, gaining ground. The chase stretched across the frozen landscape. Jacob led them into a narrow canyon, the walls closing in on either side. The soldiers followed, confident in their numbers. Too confident. Jacob knew this canyon. Knew that half a mile in, it narrowed to barely wide enough for one horse. Knew that just beyond that choke point, it opened into a box canyon with steep walls. It was a trap, but not for them. They burst into the box canyon. Jacob reined in, turning his horse. Magnus and Ayasha did the same, forming a line with Naichi protected behind them. The soldiers poured through the narrow gap. 10 men, rifles ready, certain of victory. They never saw the Apache warriors until it was too late. They had been waiting in the darkness, positioned on the canyon walls. 20 of them, maybe more. They rose like ghosts, bows drawn, and the night filled with the whisper of arrows. 3 soldiers fell in the first volley. The others tried to turn, to flee back through the narrow gap, but the warriors had blocked it with fallen trees. They were trapped. Hold fire! A voice rang out in Apache. The shooting stopped. The surviving soldiers huddled together, weaponless now, surrounded. A figure rode forward on a paint stallion. Old Chief Manuelito, 72 years old, leader of a Navajo band that had fought the army for decades before finally accepting peace, or what passed for peace when the government kept its word. Jacob Brennan, Manuelito said in English, you are far from your mountain. I could say the same about you, old friend. I heard there was trouble at Fort Sumner. Heard that Crane's men had taken a child, an Apache child. The old chief looked at Naichi, the son of Elias Whitepath, if I am not mistaken. You knew my father? Naichi asked. I knew him well. He defended my grandson when the army accused him of theft. Proved the charges false. Your father was a good man. Manuelito turned back to Jacob. These soldiers, you want them dead? No, just gone. Mercy, Elias would have approved. Manuelito gestured. His warriors stripped the soldiers of weapons, ammunition, horses, left them with nothing but their boots and their shame. Walk back to the fort, the old chief told them. Tell Crane that there are still some in this territory who remember what justice means. Tell him the old ways are not as dead as he thinks. The soldiers stumbled away into the darkness, humiliated but alive. Manuelito watched them go, then turned to Jacob. This is only the beginning, you know. Crane will come for you with everything he has. I know. Then you need allies, people who will stand with you. The old chief smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Come to my camp tomorrow. There are others who wish to speak with you. Others who have been waiting for someone to light the spark. What spark? The one that burns down Crane's empire. They rode through the night, reaching Jacob's cabin as dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold. Magnus was barely conscious, his shoulder wound still bleeding, despite Ayasha's attempts to bind it during the ride. Inside, they laid the Norwegian on the bed. Jacob heated water while Ayasha prepared her medicines, a mixture of Apache knowledge and frontier practicality. The bullet's still in there, she said, probing the wound. It needs to come out. I know. Jacob found his whiskey, poured Magnus a generous measure. Drink this. You trying to kill me before the bullet does? But Magnus drank, grimacing at the burn. Ayasha heated her knife in the fire until the blade glowed. Hold him! Jacob braced Magnus's good shoulder. Nachi, showing more courage than many grown men, held his legs. The knife went in. Magnus screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed off the cabin walls. Ayasha worked quickly, efficiently, her hands steady despite the ordeal she had endured. The bullet came out with a wet, sucking sound, followed by a gush of blood. She packed the wound with moss and herbs, bound it tight. Magnus had passed out halfway through, his face the color of old snow. Will he live? Jacob asked. If infection doesn't set in, if he rests, if he's as stubborn as I think he is. Ayasha washed her hands in the basin, her own hands shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. He saved our lives. He has a habit of doing that. Naichi had retreated to a corner, watching everything with eyes too old for his 14 years. Ayasha went to him, knelt, pulled him into an embrace that made them both cry out from their various injuries, but neither released. Shima, the boy whispered. I thought you were dead. I thought I had lost you. She held him at arm's length, studying his face, the bruises, the fear behind the anger. Did they hurt you? Not much, mostly questions, about you, about the ledger. I told them nothing. I know you didn't. She kissed his forehead. You are your father's son. Jacob stood apart, giving them their moment. Outside, the sun rose higher, indifferent to human drama. The storm had passed, but more would come. Weather in these mountains was as changeable as fate. Mr. Brennan, Naichi approached once his mother had finally released him. Thank you for bringing me back to her. Call me Jake, and you're welcome. He extended his hand. Naichi shook it with a firm grip. My mother says you have my father's ledger, that you're going to use it to destroy Colonel Crane. That's the plan. Then I want to help. You're 14. Old enough to fight, old enough to die if it comes to that. The boy's jaw was set. They killed my father. They tortured my mother. They held me in a hole in the ground and told me I would never see daylight again. I have a right to stand against them. Jacob saw himself in those eyes, the same rage, the same need for justice that could so easily become vengeance if left unchecked. Your mother might have something to say about that. My mother knows I'm right. Naichi glanced at Ayasha, who looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. She raised me to be Apache. Apache don't run from fights. We finish them. Even if it kills you, especially then. Better to die standing than live kneeling. Jacob couldn't argue with that, wouldn't even if he could. The boy had earned his place in this fight. All right, he said. You help, but you follow orders. Mine and your mother's. Deal? Deal. They shook hands again, sealing the bargain. Magnus woke 3 days later, weak as a kitten but alive. In that time, Jacob and Ayasha had been busy. Following Manuelito's invitation, they had ridden to the Navajo camp and found more than they expected. 20 people gathered in the large hogan, Apache, Navajo, a few Mexicans whose families had been in the territory longer than any Anglo, even 2 white ranchers whose land Crane had tried to seize. They all had the same story: loss, theft, murder disguised as accidents or blamed on Indians. And they all had the same question. What could be done? Ayasha showed them the ledger. Read entry after entry, names they recognized, deaths they remembered. Proof written in Elias Whitepath's careful hand. This is evidence, she said. Legal evidence. My husband spent 14 years gathering it. If we can get it to the right people, if we can make them listen, Crane and everyone who works with him will face justice. What people? Carlos Rivera asked. He was 41, a Mexican blacksmith whose brother had died in a barn fire that Crane had arranged. Crane owns the judges, owns the sheriffs. Who's left to listen? Walter Nash, editor of the Santa Fe Chronicle. My husband trusted him. One newspaper editor against the railroad and the army? Rafael, Carlos's friend, shook his head. They'll kill him before he can print a word. Not if we do it publicly. Jacob stood, and all eyes turned to him. Sunday is the big church service at Fort Defiance. The railroad executives are coming from Santa Fe to sign the final land contracts. Half the territory will be there. Including Crane and 50 soldiers, someone pointed out. Including everyone, Jacob corrected. Soldiers, civilians, witnesses, we read from the ledger in front of them all. Make them hear the truth. Then Crane has two choices. Accept it or gun down civilians in front of the entire territory. He'll choose the second option. Maybe, but at least this time, everyone will see him for what he is. Silence fell. People looked at each other, weighing the odds, calculating the cost. I'm in, Carlos said finally. My brother deserves justice. As does my daughter, said Tekla, an Apache medicine woman who had lost her child to Crane's raids. One by one they committed. By the end of the night, 20 people had pledged to stand with Jacob and Ayasha on Sunday. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. Back at the cabin, Magnus was sitting up, drinking broth that Ayasha had made. His color was better, though he still looked like a strong wind might knock him over. You're planning something stupid, he said when Jacob told him about Sunday. I can see it in your face. We're going to read the ledger, publicly, forced Crane to respond. That's not stupid. That's suicidal. Magnus set down his bowl. Jake, he'll kill you all. Maybe, but the truth will be out there. And truth has a way of surviving even when the people who speak it don't. Noble sentiment won't mean much when you're dead. Then I'll die knowing I did the right thing. Jacob checked his rifle, began cleaning it. I'm tired of running, Magnus. Tired of hiding. Tired of watching bad men do evil things because good men are too afraid to stop them. You're thinking about Sarah again. I'm always thinking about Sarah. The cloth moved across the rifle barrel, methodical. She died because no one spoke up, because everyone was too scared or too compromised or too comfortable to care that an innocent woman was being hanged. I didn't speak up either. I was too far away, too late, too useless. That wasn't your fault. Doesn't matter whose fault it was, she still died. Jacob looked up, met his old friend's eyes. I can't bring her back, can't change what happened, but I can make sure it means something, can make sure no one else dies that way if I have breath in my body to prevent it. Magnus was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. You're going to get us all killed. Probably. And you're not going to change your mind? No. Then I suppose I'm coming with you. You can barely walk. I can sit a horse. I can fire a rifle. That's all I need. The Norwegian's smile was grim. Besides, someone needs to keep you from doing something truly stupid. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the kind of day where the sun shone bright but gave no warmth, where breath frosted in the air and ice crystals glittered like diamonds on every surface. They rode into Fort Defiance in groups of 2 and 3, arriving separately to avoid drawing attention. Carlos and his people, Tekla and her Apache women. The ranchers, all converging on the church as if for a normal Sunday service. Jacob, Ayasha, Nietzsche, and Magnus came last. Jacob had his Sharps rifle hidden under his coat. Magnus carried his old Spencer. Even Nietzsche had a pistol tucked into his belt, though Jacob hoped he wouldn't need to use it. The church was full. Crane's soldiers lined the walls, conspicuous in their uniforms. The colonel himself sat in the front pew, his right hand still bandaged from where Jacob had shot him. Next to him sat Luther Quinn, president of the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, fat and prosperous in an expensive suit. Father Donnelly stood at the pulpit, his Irish accent thick as he led the congregation in hymns. His eyes found Jacob in the crowd, gave the smallest of nods. The priest was with them. The service proceeded normally. Prayers, scripture, the familiar rhythms of Sunday worship. And then, just as Father Donnelly was about to deliver his sermon, Ayasha stood. She walked to the center aisle, stood where everyone could see her, opened the ledger. My name is Ayasha Whitepath, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. My husband was Elias Whitepath, federal prosecutor for this territory. He was murdered 9 months ago by men who feared what he knew. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Crane started to rise, his hand going to his pistol. I wouldn't, Jacob said from the back. His rifle was out now, aimed at the colonel's head. Let her speak. Soldiers reached for their weapons. But Magnus, Carlos, Rafael, and a dozen others also had guns out now. Mexican standoff. No one could shoot without everyone shooting. Father Donnelly raised his hands. Peace. This is God's house. No blood will be spilled here. An uneasy détente settled over the church. Ayasha continued reading. Entry after entry, name after name. The catalog of Crane's crimes laid bare before the community he had terrorized for years. People gasped, wept, grew angry, because these weren't strangers' names. These were neighbors, friends, family members they had been told died in accidents or raids. Now they knew the truth. When Ayasha finished reading, the silence was profound. Then Luther Quinn stood. This is slander, lies created by a savage woman to defame good men. Then explain these. Ayasha produced photographs, bank records, letters in Crane's own hand. All the evidence Elias had gathered, all the proof that couldn't be dismissed as lies. Quinn's face went purple. Where did you get those? My husband was thorough. He knew men like you would deny everything, so he made certain the truth couldn't be hidden. Crane finally found his voice. This is a circus. This woman is a criminal. And you, he pointed at Jacob, are a traitor and a murderer. Funny, Jacob said. I was about to say the same about you. The colonel's face twisted with rage. He drew his pistol with his left hand, awkward but fast enough. The shot rang out like thunder in the confined space. But it wasn't Crane who fired. It was his son. Thomas Crane stood in the doorway, his own pistol smoking. The bullet had passed over his father's head, deliberate warning shot. Put it down, father, Thomas said. This ends now. Boy, what are you doing? What I should have done years ago, what anyone with a conscience should have done. Thomas walked down the aisle, his gun never wavering. I've known for months what you've been doing. Turned a blind eye because you're my father. Because I wanted to believe you were still the man who taught me about honor and duty. Thomas, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a murderer, a thief, everything you claim to be fighting against. Thomas reached the front of the church, looked at Ayasha. I'm sorry for what he did to your husband, to your people, to all of you. Crane stared at his son, incomprehension warring with fury. You're choosing them over your own family? I'm choosing right over wrong, something you forgot how to do a long time ago. The colonel's face went through a series of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and finally something that might have been grief. His pistol lowered. Arrest him, Thomas said to the soldiers. No one moved. That's an order, Lieutenant Baker. The young officer who had been in Crane's office days before stepped forward, drew his own pistol, but he pointed it at Thomas, not his father. I don't think so, sir. The colonel's been good to me, to all of us. I'm not arresting him on the word of some squaw and a renegade mountain man. The standoff teetered on a knife's edge. Half the soldiers looked ready to follow Baker. The other half looked uncertain, and the civilians were ready to bolt or fight. Impossible to tell which. Then the church doors burst open. Federal Marshal Augustus Hayes strode in, followed by 20 U.S. Marshals. The badge on his chest gleamed in the sunlight, streaming through the windows. I'll save you the trouble, Lieutenant, Hayes said. Colonel Harlow Crane, Luther Quinn, you're both under arrest. Conspiracy, murder, fraud. The list goes on. He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. These are federal warrants, signed by a judge in Santa Fe, based on evidence provided by the late Elias Whitepath before his death. Crane's face went ashen. That's impossible. Whitepath died before he could file anything. He mailed copies to 3 different judges. Insurance, he called it. Hayes smiled without humor. Turns out he didn't trust you, Colonel. Can't imagine why. The marshal's men moved through the church, disarming soldiers, taking Crane and Quinn into custody. Baker tried to resist. A marshal cold-cocked him with a rifle butt, and he went down like a sack of grain. Thomas Crane stood aside, letting them take his father. The colonel looked at his son one last time. I did it for you, Crane said, for your future, for our family. Then you failed, Thomas replied, because all you've left me is shame. They led Crane away in chains. Quinn followed, blubbering and threatening lawsuits. The soldiers, leaderless now, surrendered their weapons without a fight. Thomas Crane stood alone as they took his father away. For a moment, their eyes met. The colonel's face twisted with something between rage and grief. You've destroyed our family, Crane said hoarsely. No, father. Thomas's voice was steady despite the tears on his face. You destroyed it long ago. I'm just refusing to live in the ruins you built. Crane opened his mouth to speak, but the marshals pulled him forward. Thomas watched until his father disappeared from sight, then turned to find Jacob and Ayasha. I'll testify, he said simply. Every detail, every crime. I have records he kept at home. Payment ledgers, correspondence with Quinn, everything. Why? Ayasha asked. He's your father. He was. But the man who raised me believed in duty and honor. This man, Thomas gestured toward where Crane had vanished. This man is a stranger wearing my father's face. I choose to honor the father I thought I had, not the monster he actually was. Jacob extended his hand. Thomas shook it, the grip firm despite the tremor. You're doing the right thing, Jacob said. Doesn't make it hurt less. Thomas released his hand, straightened his uniform. I'm resigning my commission after the trial. Can't wear this uniform anymore. Not after what it came to represent. What will you do? A ghost of a smile. Maybe become a teacher. Build things instead of destroying them. Start over where the name Crane doesn't carry his sins. The name doesn't define you, Ayasha said gently. You've already proven that. Thomas nodded, unable to speak further. He saluted Jacob once, bowed slightly to Ayasha, and walked away into the dispersing crowd. They never saw him again. But years later, a letter arrived. Thomas had moved to Boston teaching immigrant children. He'd married, had a daughter, named her Ayasha. Some legacies, it seemed, could be redeemed. Marshal Hayes approached Jacob. Mountain Jake Brennan, heard you've been causing trouble. Heard the same about you. We got word 3 days ago that you'd shot a federal officer. Came to arrest you. Hayes glanced at the ledger Ayasha still held. Then I read what the late Judge Whitepath had sent. Decided maybe I should hear your side of the story first. And now that you have? Now I think you did us all a favor. Crane's been a problem for years. We just couldn't prove it. You handed us everything we needed. Hayes extended his hand. On behalf of the United States government, I'd like to thank you. Jacob shook the offered hand, bemused. So I'm not under arrest? For what? Rescuing a woman being illegally tortured? Defending yourself against corrupt soldiers? Hell, I ought to deputize you. Hayes turned to address the congregation. Crane's empire is finished. Everyone he bribed, everyone who worked with him, they're going down too. The ledger proves everything. Justice is finally coming to this territory. The church erupted in cheers. People who had been silent for years suddenly found their voices. Hugging, crying, celebrating. A man emerged from the crowd, 43 years old, ink-stained fingers, notebook in hand. He approached Ayasha with purpose. Mrs. Whitepath, Walter Nash, Santa Fe Chronicle. He extended his hand. Your husband mailed me copies of that ledger 6 months before he died. Insurance, he called it. I've been holding them, waiting for the right moment. Ayasha's breath caught. You have copies? Front page tomorrow morning. Every detail, every name, every dollar. Nash's expression was grim but determined. By next week, newspapers from New York to San Francisco will carry the story. Your husband made sure the truth couldn't be buried. I'm just honoring his final wish. Elias, Ayasha's voice broke. He thought of everything. He trusted the law, but he also trusted the press. Smart man. Nash glanced at the marshals leading Crane away. The Chronicle stands with you, Mrs. Whitepath. Whatever comes next, the people will know the truth. He tipped his hat and melted back into the crowd, already scribbling notes for tomorrow's edition. Ayasha sank into a pew, the ledger falling from nerveless fingers. It was over. After everything, it was over. Jacob sat beside her. You did it. Finished what your husband started. We did it. She looked at him, and for the first time since he had cut her down from that hanging tree, she smiled. Really smiled. Together. Magnus limped over, his wounded shoulder making him walk crooked. Well, that went better than expected. You thought we'd all die? I gave it 50-50 odds. The Norwegian lowered himself carefully into the pew. Glad to be wrong. Nietzsche appeared, looking shell-shocked. Is it really over? This part is, Jacob said, but there's still a trial. Testimony. Making sure Crane can't weasel out of this. I'll testify, Thomas Crane said, joining them, against my father, against everyone. I have records too, evidence I've been gathering for months, ever since I realized what he was doing. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Ayasha asked. Cowardice, love, stupid loyalty to a man who didn't deserve it. Thomas met her eyes. I know it doesn't make up for what he did, for what I let him do by staying silent, but maybe it's a start. It's more than a start, she said. It's courage. Thank you. They filed out of the church into the cold, bright day. People gathered in groups, talking excitedly, planning for a future without Crane's shadow hanging over them. Jacob stood apart, watching, feeling strangely empty now that it was done. He had spent so long focused on this fight that he hadn't thought about what came after. You all right? Magnus asked. Just thinking. About Sarah? About everything. Jacob pulled his coat tighter against the wind. Crane was right about one thing. I did this because of her. Because I couldn't save her and needed to save someone else to make up for it. And did it make up for it? No, nothing can. Jacob looked at Ayasha standing with her son, both of them alive against all odds. But maybe it means her death wasn't completely meaningless. Maybe this is what she would have wanted, justice, not just revenge. She'd be proud of you. Maybe. Or maybe she'd call me an old fool who got lucky. But Jacob smiled as he said it. Marshal Hayes approached. Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Whitepath, there'll be a trial in Santa Fe, 3 weeks. Both of you will need to testify. We'll be there, Ayasha promised. Good. And Mr. Brennan, that shot you made cutting the rope from 50 yards in a snowstorm? That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen. I used to be good at my job. Still are, from what I can tell. Hayes tipped his hat. We could use men like you if you ever get tired of living in the mountains alone. I'll think about it. But they all knew he wouldn't. The mountains were where Jacob belonged, had been for 15 years, would be until he died. Still, it was nice to be asked. The crowd was dispersing now, people heading home to spread the news. By nightfall, the whole territory would know. By next week, newspapers as far away as New York would be carrying the story. The Apache woman and the mountain man who brought down a corrupt colonel. It would make good copy. Jacob didn't care about that. He cared that Ayasha and Nietzsche were safe, that Magnus would recover, that Crane would face justice. Everything else was just noise. What now? Ayasha asked, joining him. Now we rest, heal, give Magnus time to recover. Jacob looked at the mountains, always his refuge. Then we figure out what comes next. I'd like to rebuild, create something good on the ruins of what Crane destroyed. She hesitated. Would you help? Me? I'm just an old mountain man. You're more than that. You're the man who wouldn't look away, who risked everything to do what was right. Her hand found his. I could use someone like that in my life. Jacob looked at their joined hands, felt something stir in his chest that he thought had died with Sarah 20 years ago. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The hope that maybe there could be more than just surviving, maybe there could be living. I'd like that, he said, very much. And under the cold, clear sky, with the mountains watching and the future uncertain, but finally free of Crane's shadow, Jacob Brennan smiled. It was a real smile, the first in 15 years. It felt good. The fire crackled in the ranch house hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Samuel leaned forward, his young face rapt with attention, as his grandfather continued the tale that had begun with a hanging and ended with justice. But it wasn't over, was it, Grandpa? The boy asked. You said there was still a trial. Jacob's 95-year-old fingers traced the scar on his jaw, a memento from battles 50 years gone. The trial was the easy part, boy. It was what came after that tested us, tested everything we thought we'd won. What do you mean? The old man's eyes grew distant, looking past the warm comfort of the ranch to darker days. Because evil men don't go quietly. And the night before we were supposed to leave for Santa Fe, Magnus. His voice caught. Even after half a century, the memory had teeth. Magnus didn't wake up. The words hung in the air like smoke. Samuel's eyes widened. The old man continued, his voice heavy with the weight of old grief. Let me tell you about the last night we had together. The night that changed everything. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the church. Magnus lay in Jacob's cabin, his shoulder wound showing signs of infection, despite Ayasha's best efforts. His skin had taken on a gray pallor, and fever burned through him like wildfire through dry grass. Jacob sat beside the bed, wiping his old friend's forehead with a cool cloth. Magnus's breathing came in shallow gasps, each one seeming like it might be the last. "You can't die on me, you stubborn Norwegian," Jacob said quietly. "Not after everything we've been through." Magnus's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused, glassy with fever. "Jake, you remember Ingrid? Your wife, of course I remember. She used to say death was just another journey, said the souls we loved went ahead to prepare the way." Magnus smiled, and it was peaceful despite the pain. "I think she was right. I can almost see her now, standing just there by the door, still beautiful after all these years. You're not dying. Ayasha's medicine will work. You just need to rest. Don't lie to an old man. I can feel it, the cold creeping in." Magnus's hand found Jacob's, gripped it with surprising strength. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let this break you. What we did, exposing a crane, it was right, but it cost lives. Will cost more before it's done." His breathing grew more labored. "Don't carry that weight alone. Don't push away that woman and her boy because you're afraid of losing them too." "Magnus, I'm not." "You are, I can see it. Same way you pushed everyone away after Sarah died." The old Norwegian's eyes were suddenly sharp, cutting through the fever. "Life's too short for cowardice, Jake. Even long lives like ours." He coughed, a wet rattling sound. Blood flecked his lips. Ayasha appeared in the doorway. "Why?" Her face told Jacob everything he needed to know. "The infection spread to his lungs," she said quietly. "There's nothing more I can do." Magnus heard, smiled again. "Then I suppose this is goodbye, my friends." "No." Jacob's grip tightened. "You fight. You hear me? You fight." "Fought my whole life. Think I've earned some rest." Magnus looked at Ayasha. "You take care of him, yes? He's a good man. Stubborn as mountain stone, but good." "I will," Ayasha promised, tears streaming down her face. "And young Naichi, he has his father's fire. Make sure he uses it for building, not just burning." "I promise." "Good. That's good." Magnus's eyes closed, his breathing slowed. "Ingrid's waiting. Can't keep her waiting any longer. She hates that." "Magnus, please. Been an honor, Jake, to stand with you, to fight beside you." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Don't waste the time you have left. Don't hide in these mountains forever. Live, for both of us." The breathing stopped. The hand in Jacob's went slack. Magnus Olafsson was gone. Jacob sat there for a long moment, holding his friend's hand, unwilling to let go. Because letting go made it real, made it final, and he had lost too many people in his life to face another loss without it breaking something inside him. Ayasha's hand touched his shoulder. "Jacob, I'm so sorry." He stood abruptly, pulling away from her touch. "He saved us, saved all of us. And this is how it ends? Dying in a bed from infection?" He died knowing he'd done something that mattered. "That doesn't make him less dead," Jacob's voice cracked. He grabbed his coat, his rifle. "I need air." He stumbled outside into the cold morning, stood in the snow, breathing hard, feeling the weight of 55 years pressing down on him. Sarah, his wife and daughter, taken by fever. Magnus, everyone he cared about, torn away. And now he was supposed to go to Santa Fe, testify, finish this fight, when all he wanted to do was disappear into the mountains and never come back. Naichi found him an hour later, still standing in the same spot. "Mr. Brennan, my mother's worried about you. Tell her I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look like my father did, the day before they killed him. Like you're carrying the whole world, and it's crushing you." Jacob looked at the boy, 14 years old. Should have been worrying about childhood things. Instead, he'd watched his father murdered, his mother tortured, been held prisoner, and now witnessed death again. "How do you do it?" Jacob asked. "How do you keep going?" "Because stopping means they win. Crane, the railroad, all of them. They want us broken, want us to give up." Naichi's jaw set. "My father taught me that the best revenge against evil men is to keep living, to refuse to be destroyed by them." Your father was a wise man. So are you. Magnus thought so. That's why he came when you needed him. That's why he fought, and why he died without regrets. The boy was right. Jacob knew he was right. But knowing and accepting were two different things. They buried Magnus that afternoon on a hillside overlooking the valley. Ayasha sang Apache death songs while Father Donnelly, who had ridden out from Fort Defiance, read Christian prayers, a blending of traditions for a man who had lived between worlds. Carlos, Raphael, Tekla, and a dozen others had come to pay respects. Magnus had touched many lives in his years in the territory, all of them diminished by his passing. As they lowered the simple wooden coffin into frozen ground, Jacob spoke. Magnus Olafsson was the best man I ever knew. Fought beside me in the Sioux Wars, saved my life more times than I could count. And when I asked him to risk everything for people he barely knew, he didn't hesitate. That's who he was, a man who stood up when it mattered. He paused, fighting to keep his voice steady. He died so others could live free. There's no greater thing a man can do, so we honor him by finishing what we started, by making sure his death meant something, by living the kind of lives he'd be proud to have fought for. They filled in the grave, planted a wooden marker with Magnus's name and dates roughly carved. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and Magnus had always valued honesty above all else. As the crowd dispersed, Ayasha approached Jacob. We leave for Santa Fe tomorrow. Will you be ready? Does it matter if I'm ready? Yes, because I need you there. Naiche needs you there. All of us do. Her hand found his arm. Magnus was right. Don't push us away because you're afraid. I'm not afraid. You're terrified. I can see it. You think if you care about us, we'll be taken away. Like Sarah, like your wife and daughter, like Magnus. Her grip tightened. But we're already in danger. Have been since this started. Pushing us away doesn't protect us. It just means we face it alone. Jacob wanted to argue, wanted to pull away, but he was tired. So tired of running from connection, of hiding from the possibility of more loss. What if I'm not strong enough? He asked quietly. What if I fail you the way I failed them? Then we fail together, but at least we won't be alone. He looked at her, really looked at her, saw the strength that had carried her through torture and loss, saw the hope that hadn't died despite everything Crane had done to kill it, and saw something else, something that made his old heart beat faster. The possibility of a future that wasn't just survival, the chance for something more. All right, he said, I'll come to Santa Fe. I'll testify. I'll see this through. Thank you. But after the trial's over and Crane's in prison, I don't know what comes next. Then we'll figure it out, together. She smiled and it transformed her face. Magnus would approve. Yeah, he would. The journey to Santa Fe took 5 days. They traveled as a group for safety. Jacob, Ayasha, and Naiche, along with Carlos, Raphael, Tekla, and a dozen others who would testify. Marshal Hayes provided an escort of federal marshals, riding alongside with rifles ready. The territory was changing already. News of Crane's arrest had spread like wildfire. Railroad construction had halted while federal investigators combed through records. Corrupt officials were resigning or fleeing. The power structure that had seemed unshakable was crumbling. But that made it dangerous. Cornered animals fought hardest, and the railroad still had money, influence, and desperate men willing to do anything to protect their interests. They camped the second night in a small canyon. Guards posted at both ends. Fires kept low. Everyone on edge, waiting for attack that might never come. Jacob sat apart from the others, cleaning his Sharps rifle for the 3rd time that day. Ayasha joined him, bringing coffee that tasted like mud, but was hot. You're quiet, she observed. Thinking. About Magnus? About everything. Magnus, Sarah, the trial, what happens after. He accepted the coffee, let the warmth seep into his hands. I'm not used to having people depend on me anymore. You had Magnus. That was different. Magnus could take care of himself. But you, Naiche, all these people looking to me to lead them. He shook his head. I'm just an old mountain man. I'm not a leader. You're the man who shot Colonel Crane to save a stranger, who raided Fort Sumner against impossible odds, who stood in a church and defied an army. Ayasha sat beside him. That's leadership, Jacob. Not speeches or orders, just doing what's right when everyone else is too scared to move. I was scared too. I know, but you moved anyway. That's what makes you different. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the camp, someone was singing, a Mexican ballad about lost love and found hope, the kind of song that made you remember you were alive. Jacob, Ayasha's voice was soft. After the trial, after everything's done, what will you do? Go back to my cabin, I suppose. It's all I know anymore. And if someone asked you to stay, to help build something new instead of hiding in the mountains? He looked at her, saw vulnerability in her eyes that she rarely showed. Are you asking? I'm saying that Naichi and I will need a place to live, that the territory's going to need good people to help rebuild what Crane destroyed, and that I'd like you to be part of that, if you want to be. Ayasha, I'm 45 years old, set in my ways, not good with people anymore. You're good with the people who matter, good with us. She took his hand. I'm not asking for promises, not asking you to be something you're not, just asking if you'd consider staying, being part of something bigger than surviving alone. Jacob thought about Magnus's last words, about not wasting the time he had left, about living instead of just existing. I'll consider it, he said. That's all I can promise right now. That's enough. She squeezed his hand. It's a start. The third night the attack came, Jacob woke to gunfire and shouting. Rolled out of his bedroll with his rifle already in hand, instincts from decades of frontier living kicking in. 6 men on horseback, charging into the camp. Not soldiers, railroad mercenaries. Hired killers sent to stop them from reaching Santa Fe. Defense positions, Marshal Hayes was shouting. His marshals were returning fire, but they'd been caught off guard. One was already down, blood spreading across his chest. Jacob aimed, fired. A mercenary fell from his horse, levered another round. Fired again. Another man down. But there were too many. They swept through the camp like a tornado, scattering defenders, looking for something or someone. The ledger! Ayasha's scream cut through the chaos. They're after the ledger! Jacob saw her running toward her saddlebag where the precious evidence was stored. Saw a mercenary bearing down on her, pistol raised. He didn't think, didn't aim. Just threw himself forward, tackling Ayasha as the shot rang out. Felt the bullet burn across his ribs, hot and angry. They hit the ground together, Jacob rolling to put himself between her and the shooter. The mercenary aimed again. Jacob's sharps was empty, too far to reach his Colt. Naiche appeared from nowhere. The boy had his father's pistol, the one Ayasha had given him. He fired 3 times. The first 2 shots went wide, the recoil too much for his young arms. The third took the mercenary in the chest. The man fell. Naiche stood over him, shaking, the gun smoking in his hands. More shots. Carlos and Rafael had rallied the others. The surviving mercenaries realized they were outnumbered and broke off, galloping into the darkness. Silence fell, broken only by groans of the wounded and the nervous whickering of horses. Is everyone all right? Hayes was doing a quick count. 2 marshals dead, 3 wounded. But the attackers had gotten worse. 4 dead, 2 escaped. Jacob pushed himself up, wincing as his ribs protested. Blood soaked his shirt, but the wound wasn't deep. He'd been lucky. Ayasha was already checking him, tearing his shirt open. You idiot. You could have been killed. Better me than you. That's not for you to decide. Her hands shook as she cleaned the wound. Anger and fear making her rough. We need you, Jacob. I need you. Don't you dare throw your life away. I was protecting you. Then protect yourself too, because losing you would destroy me. She met his eyes, and he saw the truth there. Saw that somewhere in the days since he'd cut her down from that hanging tree, she'd come to care for him. Not as a savior or an ally, as a man. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Ayasha, don't. She pressed a hand over his mouth. Don't say anything you'll regret. Just promise me you'll be more careful. I promise, Boam. She finished bandaging his ribs in silence. But her touch was gentle now, almost tender. Naichi appeared, still holding the pistol. His face was white. I killed a man. Jacob stood, ignoring the pain in his side, and put his hands on the boy's shoulders. You saved your mother's life. Saved mine too. But I killed him. I can still see his face. Still see him fall. Good. Remember it. Remember what taking a life costs. Jacob's voice was firm but not unkind. Never get comfortable with killing, Naichi. The day it becomes easy is the day you become like the men we're fighting. Will it always feel like this? Like there's something broken inside me? Probably, but that broken feeling means you're still human, still good. Jacob pulled the boy into an embrace, felt him shake with keys he'd been holding back. Your father would be proud of you, not because you killed, but because you protected someone you love. There's honor in that. They held the position until dawn, expecting another attack. It never came. The mercenaries had been a desperate gambit by railroad executives hoping to stop the testimony. They'd failed, and now they'd lost men and gained nothing. Marshal Hayes examined the dead, found papers on one identifying him as employed by the railroad. This is going to make the trial very interesting, when he said, attempted murder of federal witnesses. The railroad's going to hang for this. Good, Ayasha said. She was clutching the ledger, refusing to let it out of her sight now. Let them hang. They reached Santa Fe on the afternoon of the 5th day. The territorial capital was larger than Fort Defiance, more civilized. Brick buildings lined streets. Telegraph wires connected it to the wider world. But underneath the veneer of progress, Jacob could see the same corruption that had infected the entire territory. That was about to change. The trial was held in the federal courthouse, a grand building of stone and imported wood that spoke of power and permanence. Judge Marcus Aldrich presiding, 62 years old, reputation for fairness that had survived decades of frontier justice. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from newspapers as far away as New York and Chicago, railroad executives in expensive suits, territorial officials sweating despite the cool weather. And in the front row, in chains and prison clothes, Colonel Harlow Crane. He looked diminished somehow. The uniform was gone, the authority stripped away. He was just a man now, a man who had made terrible choices and would pay for them. The prosecutor was Theodore Blackwood, a young firebrand from the Attorney General's office, who saw this case as his chance to make a name. He was 28, ambitious, and absolutely relentless. Call your first witness, Judge Aldrich said. The prosecution calls Ayasha Whitepath. She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. For the next 3 hours, she told her story. About Elias and his investigation, about the ledger and what it contained, about Crane's torture and the threat to her son, about everything. The defense attorney, a slick Easterner named Harrison Webb, tried to rattle her during cross-examination. Mrs. Whitepath, isn't it true that you're Apache? That your people have been at war with the United States for decades? My people defend their land, just as yours would if someone tried to take it. Isn't it possible that this ledger, these accusations, are simply Apache propaganda designed to make the Army look bad? My husband was a federal prosecutor. He worked for the government you claim we're trying to undermine. The ledger contains official documents, bank records, photographs. Would you like to claim all of that is propaganda too? Webb changed tactics. You were arrested for stealing federal documents. I was tortured without trial for trying to expose corruption. Colonel Crane says he was following proper procedures. Colonel Crane is a liar and a murderer, and I can prove it. Ayasha looked directly at Crane. Tell them about the Martinez family. Tell them about Medicine Man Mongus. Tell them about the 68 people you killed for railroad money. The courtroom erupted. Judge Aldrich banged his gavel. Order! I will have order! Webb tried to continue, but the damage was done. Ayasha had turned the cross-examination into an accusation. The jury was listening now. Really listening. Call your next witness, the judge said when things settled. The prosecution calls Jacob Brennan. Jacob took the stand. His hand on the Bible felt strange. He'd made many promises in his life, kept most of them, broken others, but this one mattered more than most. Mr. Brennan, please tell the court how you came to be involved in this case. Jacob told them about seeing Ayasha hanging, about cutting her down, about Magnus and Fort Sumner, about the ledger and what it revealed. Then Blackwood asked the question that changed everything. Mr. Brennan, you were present at the Martinez Ranch raid in March 1876. Is that correct? Yes. Can you tell the court what happened that night? Jacob took a breath. This was it. The moment of confession. The admission that he'd been there, been part of it, even if he hadn't pulled the trigger. We were told we were tracking Apache raiders, that the Martinez family was harboring them. When we arrived, there were no Apache, just a family, sleeping in their home. What did Colonel Crane order? He ordered the house burned, said it would send a message to anyone else thinking about helping hostile Indians. And did you follow that order? No, I refused, put down my weapon and walked away, resigned my commission the next morning. But the house was burned anyway. Yes, by other men who followed Crane's orders. Jacob looked at the colonel. 4 people died, a father, a mother, 2 sons, because Colonel Crane wanted to collect $1,800 from the railroad. The courtroom went silent. This was different from reading entries in a ledger. This was a witness, someone who had been there, someone who could testify to what Crane had done. Webb stood for cross-examination. Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you shot Colonel Crane, that you're biased against him? I shot him to save a woman being tortured. I'd do it again. Isn't it also true that you hold a grudge against the colonel, that he signed the execution order for your sister Sarah? Jacob's hands clenched on the railing. He did sign that order for a woman who was innocent, just like he's guilty of murdering 68 others. So you admit you're biased. I'm biased toward the truth. If that's a problem, then this whole proceeding is meaningless. Webb tried a few more questions, but got nowhere. Jacob was unshakable. He'd spent 45 years in mountains and wars and hard places. One lawyer with fancy words wasn't going to break him. The trial continued for 3 days. Witness after witness took the stand. Carlos Rivera testifying about his brother, Tekla about her daughter, Thomas Crane, the colonel's own son, providing evidence he'd gathered while serving under his father. That testimony hurt Crane more than anything. Watching his son turn against him, seeing the disgust in Thomas's eyes. Whatever the jury decided, the colonel had already lost the only thing that mattered to him, his legacy. On the 4th day, the defense called Crane himself to testify. He took the stand with the bearing of a military man, even in chains, answered questions about his service, his decorations, his long career protecting the frontier. Then Blackwood stood for cross-examination. Colonel Crane, do you deny the charges against you? I deny that I did anything wrong. Everything I did was in service to this nation. Including murder? Necessary actions taken to ensure peace and progress. Necessary, that's interesting. Blackwood picked up the ledger. According to this, you received over $30,000 from the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad over a 10-year period. What services did you provide for that money? I helped facilitate construction, smoothed over disputes with local populations, by killing them, by maintaining order. Crane's composure cracked. You sit here in your fancy courthouse and judge me, but you weren't there, weren't trying to build civilization in a wilderness full of savages who wanted to drag us back to the Stone Age. So the Martinez family were savages, Medicine Man Mangus, Elias Whitepath? Obstacles, all of them, standing in the way of progress that benefits everyone, even if that progress was built on their graves. Crane stood, chains rattling. Yes, because that's how it's always been. Someone has to have the courage to make the hard choices, to do what's necessary even when it's unpleasant. That's leadership. That's sacrifice. That's murder, Colonel. Blackwood's voice was cold. And you're going to pay for it. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of accepting bribes, how do you find? Guilty. Guilty, guilty, guilty. On every count. Crane sat motionless as the verdicts were read, his face carved from stone. Judge Aldrich looked at the colonel. Harlow Crane, you have been found guilty of crimes that shock the conscience of this court. You betrayed your oath. You murdered innocent people. You corrupted everything you were supposed to protect. The sentence is life imprisonment. You will be transferred to Fort Leavenworth Federal Prison to serve your sentence. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Guards led Crane away. He looked at Jacob one last time. I did what I had to do, the colonel said. One day you'll understand that. No, Jacob replied, I won't. Luther Quinn and the other railroad executives were sentenced next. Guilty on all counts. 20 years each. The Atlantic and Pacific Railroad was fined millions, ordered to return illegally seized land, forced to pay reparations to families of victims. It wasn't enough. Money couldn't bring back the dead. Prison couldn't undo the harm. But it was justice. Imperfect. Incomplete. But real. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. News of the verdict had spread. People cheered as Jacob, Ayasha, and Nietzsche emerged. Reporters shouted questions. But Jacob ignored them, pushing through to find air. Ayasha found him an hour later, sitting alone in a small park. You all right? She asked. Magnus should be here. Should have seen Crane sentenced. He knows, wherever he is, he knows. She sat beside him. We did it, Jacob. We actually did it. We did. And it cost Magnus his life. Nearly cost yours. Naichi killed a man. All that blood, all that pain, for what? Crane's in prison, but the railroad still exists. Corruption still exists. We changed one thing and the world's still broken. But we changed one thing, that matters. Ayasha took his hand. Magnus didn't die for nothing. Elias didn't die for nothing. They died so people like us could stand up and say no, could fight back, could prove that truth matters more than power. I'm tired, Ayasha, tired of fighting, tired of losing people. I just want to go back to my cabin and be left alone. I know, but that's not living. That's hiding. She turned to face him. Magnus told me what he said to you before he died, about not pushing us away, about taking the chance to live instead of just survive. He had no right to ask that of me. He had every right because he knew you, knew you'd run back to your mountains and spend the rest of your life regretting it. Her voice softened. Don't run, Jacob. Stay. Build something with us. I don't know how to be part of something anymore. Then learn. We'll teach you. She smiled. Nietzsche and I are going back to Fort Defiance, going to use the reparation money to start a school, teach Apache and white children together, make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to the next generation. A school? Elias would have liked that. He would have loved it, and I want you to be part of it. Not as a teacher, not as anything you're not, just as someone who's there, who helps, who's family. Family. Jacob tasted the word. It had been so long since he'd been part of a family, since he'd let himself care enough to use that word. Yes, family. Ayasha's eyes were bright. If you want to be. He thought about Magnus's words, about Sarah and what she would have wanted, about the choice between hiding and living, between safety and love, between existing and truly being alive. I'd like that, he said, very much. Her smile was like sunrise. Then it settled. We're going home. Together. 6 months later, the school opened, a simple building made of adobe and wood, built by the combined effort of Apache, Navajo, and white settlers. 20 children attended that first day. By the end of the year, it would be 60. Jacob helped where he could, kept the building repaired, taught the older children to track and hunt, told stories of the old days, carefully editing out the parts too dark for young ears. Ayasha taught language and law, making sure every child understood their rights, that they could stand up for themselves, that they didn't have to accept injustice just because powerful men said it was necessary. Nietzsche assisted both of them, growing into a young man who had his father's intellect and his mother's strength. The killing at the camp still haunted him, but he was learning to carry it, to let it make him better rather than bitter. Thomas Crane visited once, bringing money for the school. It's from the sale of my father's property, he explained. I don't want it. Don't want anything that came from what he did. I thought this would be a better use. Your father's in prison because of us, Ayasha said. My father's in prison because of himself, because he chose power over principle. Thomas looked at the children playing. This is a better legacy than he ever gave me. Thank you for letting me be part of it. He left before they could thank him. But the money helped. Bought books, supplies, built an addition for more students. The territory was changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but changing. New laws protected native land rights. Corrupt officials were being weeded out. The railroads still operated, but under scrutiny now. Under rules that said profit couldn't come at the cost of human lives. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was better. And better was worth fighting for. One evening, Jacob and Ayasha sat on the porch of the small house they'd built near the school, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. You ever regret it, Jacob asked? Giving up the chance to go somewhere else? Do something different. You could have taken that reparation money and gone to California, started over where no one knew your story. No, this is where I belong, where Elias wanted to be, where we can actually make a difference. She leaned against him. Do you regret staying? Sometimes I miss the mountains, the quiet, the simplicity of just surviving day to day. He put his arm around her. But then I come home and see you and Naiche, see those children learning to read, see something good growing from all that pain. And I think maybe Magnus was right. Maybe this is better than hiding. Maybe. Definitely, definitely better. He kissed the top of her head. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not running away. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged. Inside, Naichi was helping younger students with their lessons. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the mountains stood eternal, watching over the valley where people were learning to live together. Jacob thought about Magnus buried on that hillside, about Elias, whose dream had finally come true, about Sarah, who had died believing justice was dead. He hoped they could see this, could know that their deaths, however unfair, had planted seeds that grew into something worthwhile. Ayasha, he said quietly. When this is done, when the school's established and Naichi's grown, when we've done everything we set out to do. He paused. Would you marry me? She lifted her head, looked at him with surprise and something else. Joy. Are you asking? I'm asking. I'm too old for you, too set in my ways, too broken from everything I've seen and done. But I love you, and I want whatever time I have left to be spent with you. You're not too old, not too broken. You're exactly who I need. She kissed him, long and sweet. Yes, I'll marry you, when we're ready, when the time's right. How will we know when that is? We'll know. They married the following spring. Father Donnelly performed the ceremony in the school building, surrounded by students and friends in the community they'd helped create. Apache traditions mixed with Christian rites, two cultures blending into something new. Thomas Crane stood up as Jacob's best man. My father destroyed so much, he said. I'm honored to stand with the man who helped build something better. The celebration lasted 3 days. Food and music and laughter. People who had been enemies learning to be neighbors. It wasn't perfect. Old wounds didn't heal overnight. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start was all you needed. The old man's voice faded. Samuel sat transfixed, his young eyes shining with unshed tears. So you lived happily ever after? The boy asked. Jacob smiled. Lived, yes. Happily? Most days. We had 32 years together, your grandmother and I. Raised 7 children, including your father. Built a school that still operates today. Watched the territory become a state. Saw laws change. Saw justice, real justice, become possible. And Grandma Ayasha, did she get to see it all? She died 5 years ago. 78 years old, surrounded by family, still fierce, still fighting for what was right until the very end. The old man's voice caught. I miss her every day, but I'm grateful for every moment we had. And the ledger? What happened to it? It's in a museum in Washington, D.C. Elias Whitepath's ledger, proof that one man with courage can change the world. That truth matters. That justice, however delayed, is worth fighting for. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, Grandpa, do you think there are still people like Colonel Crane? People who do bad things and call it progress? Yes, boy, there always will be. Then how do we stop them? Jacob looked at his grandson, saw the same fire in his eyes that had burned in Ayasha's, the same determination that had driven Elias, the same courage that Magnus had shown. By standing up, by refusing to look away, by doing what's right even when it's hard, even when it costs us. He gripped the boy's shoulder. Your grandmother used to say that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. So we do something. We stand. We fight. We make sure the truth gets told. Will you teach me how to be that kind of person? I'll teach you everything I know. Everything Magnus taught me. Everything Ayasha taught me. And when I'm gone, you'll teach your children, and they'll teach theirs. That's how we win. Not in one battle, but in every generation refusing to give up. I promise, Grandpa. I won't give up. I know you won't. You've got your grandmother's blood, your grandfather Elias's spirit, and maybe just a little bit of an old mountain man's stubbornness. Jacob smiled. You're going to do great things, Samuel. I can feel it. The fire had burned low. Outside, snow continued to fall on the ranch that Jacob and Ayasha had built together. The school still stood, now run by their children and grandchildren. The legacy continued, and somewhere in the mountains, on a hillside overlooking a valley, 3 graves stood: Magnus Olafsson, Elias Whitepath, Ayasha Whitepath Brennan, 3 people who had refused to accept injustice, who had fought, who had died knowing they'd made a difference. Jacob would join them soon. He could feel it, the cold creeping in, just as Magnus had described. But he wasn't afraid. He'd lived, really lived, had loved and been loved, had fought for something bigger than himself. That was enough. More than enough. Tell me another story, Grandpa, Samuel said, about when you were young. And Jacob did, his voice filling the ranch house with tales of adventure and courage, of truth spoken in the face of power, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because those stories mattered, would always matter, as long as someone remembered, as long as someone told them, as long as the truth ran free. The end.